The death toll from the condo collapse in South Florida has now reached 27. To talk about this in more detail is our U.S. correspondent Lisa Daftari. The mayor of Miami-Dade is still praying for a miracle.
Yeah, that's exactly what it would take to, find any survivors in this horrific, horrific nightmare. It's probably frustrating to most family members, and even those who are just following this news story as to why the excavations, the dealing, going through the rubble is taking such a long time, and the announcements that bodies have been recovered are very far and few between. But unfortunately, that number is going up, and people who are still unaccounted for, it's been days. And, they had to raise the last remaining tower, which is extremely, extremely painful for the residents there, their family members. Some had even pets that were still in the building. This whole thing is just so horrific. And as we talked about last week, there are teams coming in from all over the world, particularly from Israel, from Mexico, bringing in their expertise to get through this rubble. So many volunteers, so many people that are following the story and are invested in getting a better outcome, hopefully.
Following a three-way video call, the leaders of Germany, France, and China have called on all parties involved in the Iran nuclear talks to seize a window of opportunity for an agreement. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's so ironic that they call this a window of opportunity. Yes, a window of opportunity to deal with a murderous regime that now has a butcher. That's his nickname as a new president. If you've been following the story, the Iranian regime had an election. Some call it a selection, obviously, because the candidates who were allowed to run were only from the regime, and they were vetted based on how well they could follow the tenets of the Islamic Republic. So their new president is at the helm. He has said that he will not meet with Biden. He said that there will be no negotiations before all sanctions are removed. And now let's remember, what good behavior are we rewarding here to sit down at the negotiating table with a partner that has not complied with any of the IAEA inspections? They have marched forward with a weapons program. They have flexed their muscles, bragging about the level of uranium enrichment. They have had, so many encounters in the seas with U.S. assets and others. So, we have no reason to sit down with a murderous regime that continues to pour money into terrorism and fund terrorists around the world. And so the Europeans and the Chinese, well, they have other agendas, and they're pushing for an Iran nuclear deal to normalize relations, to get into more business and have the economy of Iran open up to them. They're seeing, obviously, opportunities for them. But there are people here who are against the nuclear deal, and they'll continue to raise the serious issues as to why we shouldn't enter a deal with the Iranian regime.
Israeli defense officials were seeing whether Iranian forces were behind a possible attack on a cargo ship under partial Israeli ownership. Lisa, fortunately, no one was hurt as the ship was possibly hit by a missile.
Yes. So, speaking of the Iranian regime and their nefarious activities on the sea, we're past the age of having these heated wars or an announcement or declaration of war, but we're seeing a lot of targeted attacks, whether it's on the seas, cyber attacks, and other ways of damaging each other's assets. And we're talking about, obviously, Israel versus the Iranian regime. Again, the U.S. and Israel being Iran's sworn enemies, the big Satan and the little Satan, as they're nicknamed by the Iranian regime. This was a cargo ship that was headed for the United Arab Emirates. It was headed for Dubai. And they are looking into or investigating whether this was, in fact, the Iranian regime. And there will probably be some retaliation or some exchange of words or actions in the aftermath. But they're looking into whether or not it was.
Lisa, let me ask you something. What's the sentiment like in Israel right now since new Prime Minister Bennett took over from Netanyahu? Are they still pretty confident in this Israeli government?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that comes up pretty often because Bibi Netanyahu was, the symbol of strength and this hawkish leadership that many people loved him for and some hated him for in Israel. But when it came down to national security, Bibi's reign was second to none. The way that he forcefully and very strongly and proudly stood up for Israel, its military, and its right to exist both around the world and at home. This new government has not had a moment to really let its hair down, so to speak, to have a breather. Why? Because they were thrown in the midst of an ongoing war. As you know, the ceasefire between Gaza and Israel was broken several times, and most recently this week with more fire balloons, these arson balloons, thrown into southern Israel, causing many, many fires. Again, it's very, very hot there. It's a hot summer, as always, these fires being in this desert area are, it's not helping. They're spreading very, very quickly. And in retaliation, Israel had to go in and take out some of Hamas's depot, headquarters, and weapons arsenals. It's ongoing. So to answer your question, when you have a government that's put in this position, against a rock and a hard spot, as they say, they have only one way to respond, and that's to defend their citizens, to defend the civilians in Israel, to defend the homeland, and to defend their borders. And there's no other way around it.
Bringing things a little closer to home right now, a new poll by the Washington Post says most Americans disapprove of the job U.S. President Joe Biden is doing on immigration, as illegal border crossings smash records each and every month.
Yeah, when I read this poll, I was confused as to whether they're not happy because they want a more lax immigration policy, or they're not happy because they're looking at the crisis on the border. But to our chagrin, it's only a 51% of those who are polled that disagree or are not confident about his border plan, with 33 approving. I'm not sure what they're approving of, because it seems like we don't have a border plan. We had Kamala Harris, Vice President, go down to the border. She, of course, was entrusted with being in charge of the border. No plan has been announced. The only thing she said to the people coming from these countries is do not come. Of course, many of the people who voted for the Biden ticket, the Kamala Harris ticket, were hoping that they would have a more lax approach to immigration. But as we both know, when pragmatism and logic kick in, you cannot have all these people at the border come in. And for those who have witnessed this chaos at the border, they're talking about the fact that it's not safe with COVID, it's not safe with children getting separated from their parents, and it's not safe when you have people who are unvetted, undocumented, getting on flights, going to different states, and really spreading themselves out throughout the United States, never to be found again. Again, there have been very, very nefarious elements that have been detected at the border. A lot of people looking for a better life, but a lot of people trying to sneak in from different terror organizations, and they have, again, been named, and they have been found. So there could be many, many more such instances. The only thing it goes to show is that this is a very vulnerable situation, very soft target, and we obviously have to come up with a more serious plan when it comes to immigration on the border.
Here's an interesting story. More jobless Americans are suing states for ending federal unemployment benefits early. Lisa, out-of-work Americans in Indiana, Maryland, and Texas have filed the lawsuits because they want the pandemic relief program that paid out an extra $300 a week reinstated.
Hal, all I can tell you is there are fast food chains across America with signs that say we will give you a $5,000 bonus to sign on for a minimum wage job. What does that tell us?
Wow.
Nobody wants to go back to work. Everyone is very comfy and cushy on these checks that are coming from the government, and nobody wants to get back on their feet. And it's a very, very, very dire situation. If I'm not surprised at this lawsuit. I mean, people are, again, very used to getting the unemployment and then given the pandemic relief. So, the two checks combined give them a pretty salary. They can be doing work on the side if they'd like to make extra, pocket money. But at the same time, these checks it's just too good to pass up. So people are having a very hard time hiring. That's why you have all the sign-on bonuses, and it's gonna be a while before we get back to normal here.
Well, what's crazy about this as well, this is taxpayers' money. You got to pay this back. Just
Right.
getting deeper and deeper in debt here, right?
Right. And Hal, you make a great point. This is such a short-sighted, it's like giving them the fish rather than making them fishermen kind of thing. It's like, okay, you might eat what's 300, an extra 300 a week, where I'm not scoffing at that, but go to work. And obviously the opportunity long-term will be, exponentially more.
Lisa, the hackers who have claimed responsibility for an international ransomware attack have lowered their asking price in a private conversation with a cybersecurity expert. The Revel ransomware gang is publicly demanding about $70 million to restore the data that it's holding ransom information from schools in both New Zealand and Sweden, but they've lowered their price tag now to $50 million. I'm thinking maybe we'll hold on a few more days. Maybe it'll drop down to 30 or 20 million. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, whoever knew that ransomware there was like haggling involved, and it's such a business where you could negotiate your price. This just underscores the importance of really firming up our infrastructures online. This is again linked back to a Russian group that we've had obviously issues with in the past with very serious hacks. This is yet another one. These are private organizations that go underground and they target very important online infrastructure and then ask on demand ransomware, meaning they demand ransom for to reinstate and put their servers back up. Awful, but they're using it as a weapon. They're using it as a tool, and just gives us, more of an urgency to firm up these targets.
American forces vacated Afghanistan's Bagram air base on Friday. Now, that was a region that was once bustling with 100,000 troops. And this is all part of U.S. President Biden's Afghan withdrawal?
Yes. So it's a very significant withdrawal. This is an important step in the overall withdrawal of the remaining 2,500 to 3,500 troops that are in Afghanistan, as you said, by the September 11th deadline. So this is a step-by-step process. They have evacuated this area. It was a little mini city of sorts. So whoever served in Afghanistan knows this area very well. And now it will be evacuated, creating a political and cultural, I should say, vacuum for now.
Will this actually fall back into the hands of the insurgents? A lot of terrorist groups and terrorist cells in the region?
Right. As I was getting the breaking news about them evacuating this air base, I thought to myself, how many days is it going to be before, terrorists are able to, as we know, Afghanistan has a major problem with the Taliban, and they've never had, a peaceful moment in the past 2 decades. Sure enough, an article came out hours later saying that it's already been looted, all the laptops, computers, anything worthwhile was taken, and they're just claiming their territory. When the U.S. evacuates, what they do is they entrust that location to the Afghan government. The Afghan government has very little power, control over the Taliban, over these insurgencies, and for that reason, there obviously is and will be the threat of these insurgencies taking over. But that is, the pros and cons, the weighing out of the decision to evacuate, and that's why you have so many people who were against this evacuation, and they predicted that this is exactly what would happen.
Wow. Facebook, Twitter, and Alphabet Inc.'s Google have warned Hong Kong that they could stop offering their services in the city if authorities proceed with planned changes to data protection laws that could make them liable for the sharing of people's information online. Tell me more.
Right. So Hong Kong might go into having this anti-doxing law, which means you can't post people's private information. So the platforms that you mentioned, by virtue of their operating their system, they offer information, right? So if you're on Facebook or if you're on Twitter or if you're on Google, you're looking for people's information, or you're looking at their pictures, you're looking at their birth dates and other important information. So these companies don't want to get into any legal trouble, and it's a liability, right? Why get involved if that's going to be the case? Now, obviously, this is a disturbing outcome because we know that Hong Kong is under a lot of pressure from China with censorship, with the shutting down of important vital media groups that are telling the truth. There's silencing the opposition. They're silencing any dissidents. So if we don't have these platforms there where people can become those citizen journalists and continue telling us their stories and continue telling us the truth, Hong Kong will go entirely dark, and that is the sad outcome of all of this.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari joining us once again from Los Angeles. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.